Good morning, everybody. Thank you for turning up early for this presentation. So, what I'll be talking about is research that we did with what we thought were the potential end users for TURNkey. So, we identified the end users as potentially being civil protection, firefighters, first responders, and we also spoke to municipalities. Now, the reason we spoke to them was that we wanted to make sure that while we were developing TURNkey, we took into account the needs of the people that were going to be using it. So we devised a program that spanned across the 3 years of the project, where we went back to the end users to check at every point whether what we were developing was appealing to them and whether it would be useful. So, what did we do? So we spoke to civil protection and first responders in 3 EU cities, so Bucharest, Patras, and Reggio Calabria. Now, these were chosen specifically, besides being close to the testbed areas, they were chosen specifically because they're quite similar, so they have similar characteristics that makes them valuable end users for TURNkey. Now, the similarities were they're all areas of seismic risk. They will also have a history of either high-impact earthquakes or other natural disasters like seaquakes or even man-made disasters that left a high number of victims. So even if, like for the very young people that we spoke to, even if they don't personally remember an earthquake, but they've heard about it from their parents or their grandparents, and they have it, it's like a collective memory of a major disaster and the impact it can have on the population of that city. And that creates a particular mindset towards an earthquake, as opposed to a city where earthquakes aren't really an issue. And the other thing that they have in common, and which is very common, I think, in many European cities, is that they all have areas in the city, and it's usually the city center, although not always, where you either have very old buildings that are at risk in the event of an earthquake, or have not been built according to the anti-seismic regulations. So they know that there are areas in the city that are at risk in case of an earthquake. However, so these are the similarities, and the similarities make them viable end users for the solution. TURNkey can be useful to them because they are this way. However, we wanted them to also be different. And the difference that they have is that they have different cultural profiles. The reason this is important is that we know from other projects and other literature that the culture of a place impacts the way people respond and prepare for a disaster. So, knowing that within Europe there are cultural differences, we wanted to make sure that we captured a whole spectrum of cultures, or as much as possible. So the attitude, the way people think about disaster, and the way people think about how authorities react during a disaster, whether authorities are looking out for them, or whether authorities actually have the competence and the efficiency to protect them during a disaster, varies from culture to culture. There's a difference across these 3 cultures. I have researched especially Bucharest and Italy a number of times, especially on the cultural mindsets that are different, that would impact the way that citizens would react. And therefore, the first response has to be tailored to the citizens and the culture. Okay, now what this meant, I'm going back to our end users, is that we have about 75 hours of speaking to end users over the course of these 3 years. So we've got a lot of feedback from them over the course of the project. We also, at the same time, organized 18 citizen discussion groups in the 3 locations. The reason for this was that we wanted to validate what civil protection in particular were telling us. So civil protection would look at TURNkey and would tell us, okay, I would use this information to communicate this to citizens because I think this would help citizens react well, prepare, or respond well during an earthquake. We wanted to make sure to speak to citizens as well. So we went back to citizens and we said, what if the authorities communicated this? How would you react? So we checked that was civil protection, because it's mostly civil protection that will be communicating, and citizens actually matched. Now, just to give you an idea, something happened to the slide. This is just a list of the roles of the people that we spoke to. The lines that are blanked out for some reason are the most senior people that we spoke to. I can talk you through it. So for Bucharest, what is missing is what they have is it's actually a military department, and it's the Inspectorate for Emergency Situations, and we spoke to the head of that inspectorate. In Patras, we spoke to the head of the fire brigade for Patras, and we also spoke to the head for the Special Disasters Unit, which is an across Greece organization. We spoke to the head of that organization. In Italy, we spoke to probably the most senior decision maker. We spoke to the vice director of the Directorate for the Response. I don't remember the words exactly now, but they're basically the vice director for all the firefighters in Italy. So they actually would be the person signing the check for Italy on TURNkey. And we also spoke to the head of the fire brigade for Reggio Calabria, and they're also the head for the fire brigade for the whole of the Reggio Calabria province. So we spoke to very senior decision makers in the true locality. We did that on purpose, of course, because we wanted to find out what the people who would be taking the decision think about TURNkey. But we also spoke to the level beneath that. So we spoke to the people who were controlling the operations, who would be in the operations center, where you would have the officers actually using TURNkey. And because we wanted to make sure that besides TURNkey delivering valuable information, it's also delivering it in a way that can be implemented, that is easily used by our end users. So the operations people were the important part here. Oh, there we are. Okay. So those are the ones that I just spoke about. Okay, so like I said, we spoke to end users throughout the project. 3 times we went back to end users. So the first time was in December 2019, and we went there with the idea of TURNkey. This was the beginning of the project. So we went there with a concept. We said, okay, we're thinking of developing this platform. This is why. This is what we think it's going to deliver to you. It was a very sort of short paragraph, just the concept to get the initial feedback and our question was, okay, what do you think of this? Is this appealing? What are your suggestions so that we can start going forward? We went back again about a year later, and then we had a detailed list of this is the information that TURNkey would give you. So we actually went, okay, it will give you an early warning, it would give you a forecast, it would give you, and we gave them a list. And we went through the information now and said, which of these would be useful to you? Which is a priority? Is there anything missing? What else? So we could feed back on the kind of information that TURNkey would be delivering. And then, just a couple of months ago, we went back again with the version of the platform that you saw yesterday. So it was planned to be a face-to-face interview, but we couldn't because of COVID, unfortunately, so we couldn't sit down and actually take them to the platform. But we took them through the screens. So we said, okay, this is what would happen, exactly what you had yesterday, as in, this is what would happen, an alert would come through, and then it would populate with information, and then you would get these graphs that show you the casualties and the functionality of the buildings and so on. So we took them through it, and we said, right now, is the way that this is presented, does this make sense? Can you use it in this way? And what are your suggestions for improvement? So this is what we try to achieve at every stage. Firstly, what information are they using now? How is this working? What can we, as TURNkey, add to that? Is the information that we are offering useful? Again, is something not very useful or not a priority, or would you add anything? And does the way that the platform deliver this information, is that appealing and useful to you? So, Firstly, and I realize that there are people in the audience that are first responders and civil protection people, so all of this is what your peers in other countries have said. So, understanding the context, so how you view, I am focusing here, now I need to say one thing, there's a lot of data as you can imagine from 3 studies over 3 years, and I only chose what I think is the most relevant points, so this is not the full picture, but it's just like a few highlights of what we got. But firstly, what I did was I tried to understand how are first responders and civil protection operating. Why is that? Because if we find what the gaps are, so what information are you using now and what is missing? If we identify what is missing and if TURNkey can deliver that need, what is missing, then that's excellent, right? Then you actually have a clear space for TURNkey. So, how does it work now? So we found a very interesting difference between civil protection at a very top level, civil protection and first responders. With civil protection, it's a very wide angle view. So they're all about planning, and it's planning from preparing for an earthquake, the response, managing the response, and then the recovery. So they have a very wide angle view. They have a very long term, a lot of their time is invested in the planning along the cycle of the earthquake. First responders are extremely focused on intervention. So it's a very narrow focused. So as one first responder in Italy told me, we are there for the first 72 hours, that's us, we're there, we're in there. After the first 72 hours, we're out. It becomes, of course, unless there are other events, but if after the 72 hours, their role is less in the foreground, and civil protection tends to take over at that point for recovery. It doesn't mean they're not there, but the immediate response especially, is their focus and how to intervene as quickly and as accurately as possible, and that is key to TURNkey. So, some things that civil protection do in order to do this planning activity. They plan protocols to keep citizens safe. They apply structural prevention, so a lot about the buildings and how to secure them in case of an earthquake. They carry out simulation. They identify safe areas where citizens can gather in the event of an earthquake. And they promote preparedness. Civil protection they do work with first responders, of course, who go into schools and so on, but civil protection tend to be the organization responsible for promoting awareness and preparedness among citizens. All 3 countries had active campaigns going on about how to prepare for an earthquake. There was some awareness, but very low preparedness. This was not a surprise, but that's the situation. Citizens in general do not consider themselves very well prepared. Firefighters, they run response simulations. They're all about the first response, the immediate response, and also they train on securing assets, again, how to secure key assets so that they're more secure during after an earthquake. Set up and they train specialist rescue units, and they also set up expert units for making search and rescue safer. So, first responder, like civil protection, wants to keep citizens safe. They also, it is an equal priority, want to keep first responders safe, of course. So it's something that they actively look into. And another thing, which again is interesting to TURNkey, is they want to find tools to improve the internal communications during search and rescue. So one of the first things that happens is that normal communications channels, some of them at least, tend to go down. And communication with people in the field, so with the search and rescue teams, can be quite difficult. And what happens is, right now they're using a variety of channels at the same time. This is a good thing because, of course, if one channel goes down, they can use another, but it also means that there are high volumes of information coming in at the same time. So this is one of the key things in an earthquake. Besides information coming in from the search and rescue teams and the survey teams themselves, or the contact people in hospital, in schools, or whatever, you also have a lot of information coming in from citizens who are calling. So communication becomes very intense immediately after an earthquake, and they're always looking for tools on how to channel this information and make sure that they can effectively receive and communicate during that time. And the other thing, which is very interesting to TURNkey, firefighters are very actively, proactively looking out for new technologies. They're in the market to find technology that can help them in their work. So this is for technology for locating the victims that are under the rubble, or for speeding up the rescue, anything that helps speed up the rescue. Because we know there's so much literature about a faster response being linked to more lives being saved. It's actually that simple. It needs to be quick. And identifying the priority areas for intervention. These are critical to first responders, right? So where do I go first? It is so important. So, prevention. So we focused on the 2 stages. The next stage was, okay, this is what you do. Now tell us what you need. And we focused on the 2 stages, prevention and preparedness. In prevention, so over here, what tends to happen in prevention, again, this is a very top level finding, we have a lot more detail, but I'm giving the top level result here. They carry out simulations. The end users carry out simulations, but these simulations right now tend to be based on their knowledge of individual assets. So they know that there's a shopping center here and a hospital there, and they know approximately the risk of those assets and so on, and they try to plan around what they know around those individual assets. And they do have a knowledge of the morphology of the area and the construction profile, so they know where the at-risk buildings are, right? So they try to piece this together, and having that, they try to carry out simulations. But importantly, and this is what they told us actually themselves, their focus, because this is the way their information is held, is on key individual assets. So they look at one building at a time. They tend to look at one building at a time. And they lack the means to look at scenarios across the wider areas. They want to be able to look at zones within their city and see what happened in this area, so that I know, do I send the first responders to this area in the west of the city? Do I send it to this area in the north of the city? So they're interested in areas rather than individual assets. Within TURNkey, these are called geo areas. So I'm going to be referring to them as geo areas, zones within the city, geographical zones. So what are the user needs? Very active needs here. They need complex scenarios, not individual, not one building at a time, but complex scenarios. They need to understand what would happen across the city, right? So yesterday we spoke about the hospital, and the hospital people need to understand what's going on in that building. But civil protection and first responders need to understand what's going on in the city as a whole to organize the intervention. And they need a centralized database. This is another thing that was missing. They do hold information. They all said that we need more information about the buildings in our city and how they would react. The other thing that is not very well organized is the sharing of this information across different organizations. So as you know, if there's a big earthquake, you have loads of organizations coming in to help. So this could be first responders from other regions, first responders from other countries, other types of response organizations. And coordinating this is really important. So what often happens, the difficulty for civil protection especially, is actually knowing what's going on and planning so that everybody knows what to do. So planning ahead. So to be able to do that, you need to be able to coordinate multiple organizations. To coordinate multiple organizations, you need to have the same picture, both of what the city looks like and where the risks are, and then of what has happened. So some kind of system that all the important response organizations can access is critical, and it doesn't exist yet. There are some local, very localized things. People have set even unofficial channels up, but nothing that's on an official level. So what do they need? The way to see complex scenarios, create complex scenarios, and integrate information and response across organizations. 2 very important needs and 2 very interesting things to hear for TURNkey. So in response, what's the key thing there? The quick and accurate response. That is what we're looking for in the response phase. Now, there are very quick decisions, as our guests will know here, that are being taken immediately after an earthquake. You need to take a quick decision on where to go, how many people to send, what equipment to send, right? And it needs to be fast because it's key to saving people's lives. These decisions tend to be based on the relative impact of the general area. So like I said, the city has been hit. Which areas are the most severely hit? Where is the emergency? Where is the critical emergency? Where do I need to go first? And which is the priority? And the other thing, which is very interesting to me, is when an earthquake has just happened, you're getting loads of information, but not all information comes in at the same speed. So you don't actually, there are some areas where you think something serious has happened, but you don't actually have the detail. What I found from my participants is that they estimate on the worst case scenario. What is the worst case scenario? From what we know about this area, maximum damage, maximum impact, what is likely to be the citizen need in this area? Whatever I assess to be the citizen need based on the worst case scenario, then I will decide where to send my teams. That's the way, the two top things that are taken into account, and in a very quick, it needs to be a very quick response. So the key needs here, loads. We spend loads of time talking about this with our participants. So, of course, key, identify the priority areas. Where do I need to send my search and rescue? This is really important. Something one person told me, sometimes you get a call from this area and you send your team there, but actually another area has been more severely hit, but we haven't heard, we don't know yet. So what happens is our firefighters are in the first area and they get stuck there. Stuck is the word they use. They get stuck there because they're there, they're not helping people, they can't leave. But actually the other area was more urgent, but we didn't know that at the time. So tell me where the priorities are. Give me visibility. Visibility is a key word at this stage. Oops, I'm sorry. So then, reduce the time needed to verify and process. Like I said, there's so much information coming in. Centralize it and process it so that I know how to take a decision. I'll have the information to take a decision quickly. Facilitate an integrated response. Like I said, multiple organizations, so help me integrate the response. Help me send out information simultaneously to ordinary organizations, show them what the protocols are, what needs to be done, give them the means to communicate back to me so I know what's going on. Integration. Safeguard first responders' lives, always a priority. So whatever I can do to actually protect my first responders, that's always a need. And then use the right channels and messages, and this is important, the messages, so what type of content and what type of words do we use? The phrasing that we use with citizens is very important. To give them the emergency information, the information they need immediately, and instructions on what to do. So give me the right channels to be able to do this effectively. So the key needs, visibility of the wider areas and real-time casualty and impact information. So when we then presented TURNkey, so bearing in mind this framework, these existing needs that our participants had, we said, okay, can TURNkey help you now? Now I'm going to give just the top line and the most attractive features and the benefits that they told us they could see. By far, the most attractive feature is the impact information, both for the individual assets and, as I said, very importantly, for the geo area. So you saw it yesterday. You saw the maps, you can zoom in, you can look at the city, you can see the impact on the different areas, very important. And then you can also look at the graphs that show you, right, in this hospital, in this school, there is this much casualties, and so on. So this is exactly what they need. This gives them that visibility. At a glance, I can look at the whole city and see how it's being impacted. So in prevention, what would they do with this information? They would create these complex scenarios, multiple scenarios, and simulate the exercise that would take place depending on the different scenarios. They would share information on what to do in case of scenario A or scenario B with the different organizations. So integration in the planning, at the planning stage. And they would use the scenarios to identify vulnerable citizens. So they know that there are areas in the city where the buildings are more at risk, or they can simulate scenarios and they know, okay, these citizens are likely to be at risk. So they can target those citizens with information campaigns, or they would go on site and actually speak to these citizens or how to secure their houses. So very important for prevention. It makes prevention very targeted. You go where you're needed, where you're likely to be needed, and very proactive. Before it happens, I can prepare people for an event like this. In the response, what would they use this for? It would make them more accurate in estimating where to go. Where's the priority? Where do I need to go first? Maybe I'm getting lots of phone calls from this area over here, but I'm not getting anything from the other area, but actually looking at the map, that area has been devastated. I need to go there, right? And viable routes as well. So they would use it also to find out, can I actually get there? What's the best way to get to the place? Because the bridge may have fallen or whatever it is. They would allocate the rescue staff appropriately. Like I said, send more people there or send more resources there or whatever. Avoid the rescue staff getting stuck, as I said, at low priority areas. And it would protect the lives of first responders as well, especially with EEWs. I'm talking about that in an instant. So it gives visibility. This is what it gives, exactly what they need. It gives them visibility of the whole city. And it enables a quicker and more accurate response. Their top objective to saving people's lives is a quicker and more accurate response. TURNkey appears to be able to help with that. These are some quotes, actually. We've got so many more, but just to give you an idea of the kind of response that we got. So, for instance, from Bucharest, we were talking about the prevention phase. So in Bucharest, they're saying, I thought it was useful for us to be able to create some scenarios for ourselves and help us with exercises. I mean, we basically make the scenarios ourselves. With the platform, you input the data and it creates some scenarios that would make our lives easier. I mean, we would create scenario after scenario. So this is actually what they would use it for. And from the first responders, from the head of the first responders in Rome, this is about the response phase. The National Fire Brigade in Italy is a chain of command and control that covers the entire national territory. Already having a measure of the affected infrastructure makes you understand whether to alert just the nearest or also the most remote units. If I had 150 affected infrastructures, for example, the scale of the intervention would change completely, right? How many units to mobilize and resources to send. Okay. The live observations was also very interesting, very appealing feature. Again, it feeds into the visibility in a different way to the impact maps. It checks and it validates the estimates on the platform. So we know that the data on the platform gets updated. It gets more accurate after an earthquake, right? You get the initial data and then you get more data feeding into the system, and it gradually gives them more visibility. But getting live observations, especially photos from the field, is so important. It gives them more information and it validates what is coming through from the platform, especially the visuals, like I said. This was interesting to me. The senior levels are back in the office, right? They're in the control center. They're not in the field. It puts the senior levels in touch with what's going on in the field. It engages, this is a psychological thing. It engages them with what's going on, and it means that it affects their decision making in a positive way. They can see what's going on through the pictures, and it helps the decision making process. It might give them new information about the low priority assets. They might be focusing on the high priority assets, but actually information about the low priority assets might be coming through from people taking pictures on the scene, etc. And this is where citizens, the information from citizens is most useful. If citizens send in photos showing that there are people trapped under buildings, under the rubble, that is extremely valuable. This is how they would use citizen information mainly, because someone told me not all information coming in from citizens is useful. So for instance, someone said there could be a citizen that takes a photo of a building that has a crack in it. And the citizen thinks, right, this building is about to collapse. But an architect would tell you, actually, that's not in the masonry. It's not in the structural part of the building. It's fine. So where citizens can really help is help us locate where the victims are, where the people trapped are. And it feeds into the civil protection's need for information to assess how effective. So it's a cycle. The TURNkey is giving you the information on the impact, and the visuals are telling you actually what's going on. I can assess how effective things are going as I receive more information from the field, from first responders and others. It helps give me a fuller picture. And after that, for civil protection in particular, it helps me plan strategy and logistics for recovery. It helps me piece together now a realistic picture of what's happened. Then, early earthquake warnings. We had very interesting discussions about this. I won't go into all of the details, but the benefit of this, spontaneously, all my participants mentioned this, was this is useful for dangerous infrastructure. So there's a gas plant, or there's a nuclear plant or something. If it explodes, it could cause major damage. If your early earthquake warning can go, it can be preset at a certain level, whatever it is, and it can go to these buildings to shut off whatever needs to be shut off to avoid the explosion. That is where the value lies. This was mentioned across the board. And that's just a quote that says that. So the other thing is that is the aftershock. So besides early earthquake warnings, you have the aftershock warning. So which could happen immediately after. These were very interesting to help safeguard first responders' lives. I had one participant saying, I was in a building once. He had been a first responder in the field himself. He said, I was once in a building and it did collapse. And he said, if I had a 10-second warning, it would have helped me put myself in a safer place. It's really important for first responders because they're already there and they're looking out for these warnings. They would even, and this is when they would consider this facility for citizens, consider aftershocks for citizens. It's not certain, but they would consider it. Why? Because once the first event has happened, citizens are mentally alert and prepared, and they will react. Before an event had happened, my phone might not be next to me. I might miss it. I might panic. A lot of them said they might panic. Citizens said the same thing, interestingly. But the aftershock warning, yes, we would consider potentially sending that to citizens. It might help them stay alert and stay safe. Now, the other thing that was interesting, and I mentioned that this was a need, is how to communicate within the organization, with the people in the field, across organizations, and with citizens. There's a lot of communication going on. So in the prevention phase, if I can centralize, so what my participants are doing right now is they're communicating a lot of information on different platforms. A lot of them are using social media, multiple platforms on social media, but they tend to operate every channel separately. If I can centralize that and send it out, it would make my life so much easier, is what we were told. So that would help us raise awareness. Then, this was very interesting as well. They said, we know that in the event of a big earthquake, some things need to be told to citizens. We know this. Can we preset those messages and pre-word them so that they're not written by someone in a hurry, in the heat of the moment, and maybe the phrasing isn't right? This was a very interesting benefit that we hadn't thought about. So set those messages to go out to citizens having thought about, possibly tested these messages with citizens first, right? This is the most effective way to say this, preset it, and then send it out. It's a very interesting benefit to our participants. Then, in the response phase, again, I'm repeating myself now, but it's the efficient sharing of information across organizations. And the important thing about that is that you have a common understanding of the situation. Something that happens is that you have different organizations operating in different parts of the city that have a different picture of what's going on. And that complicates things. So if I can send out the same information to all the organization, I have common understanding and very little distortion or confusion. An automated and prompt alerting of key contacts, of course. We can send automated alerts to the key people that need to know immediately, even to different organizations. And the pre-programmed automated information to citizens does another thing in the response phase. If I know that I need to tell people this and this immediately after an earthquake, then people will stop calling in to ask what's happened, because that's apparently people will call just to ask what's happened, and it clogs up the 112 lines. So if I send out 1 or 2 messages with the things that people ask for, it will help free up our emergency lines. Okay, so in the end, what did the end users tell us about TURNkey? There was a high appeal, and the appeal grew the more into the project. So the positive response was higher at the end than it was at the beginning. This makes sense, because people want to see what this looks like before they commit to telling you, yes, I think this would be useful to me. So, importantly, it centralizes and it digitalizes a highly fragmented and labor-intensive process, giving end users visibility and a complex, comprehensive picture of the situation, which they had told us before we even introduced TURNkey are 2 major needs for them. It enables a faster and more accurate response and more accurate decisions around the interventions and the resources needed. It promotes a more integrated, rapid, and accurate response of the rescue machine in general. It may avoid collateral events like explosions, like I said, through especially the early earthquake warnings. It safeguards first responders' lives. It facilitates a more informed approach towards a prevention and the rehabilitation of the assets. So I look at the scenarios, I identify where the at-risk buildings or areas are, and I act. I'm proactive in safeguarding those areas and citizens and assets. And again, both better citizen management and engagement, because I have more information and I can target, I can speak to these citizens in a particular way because they live in a particular area and are at a particular risk and so on. So, what is innovative about TURNkey? This was mentioned, it's something new. Again, a very important thing when you're launching a new product, because if it's already in the market, you've got competition. If it's not in the market, then you're launching a new product, and end users are likely to see the difference between your product and someone else's. So, what's innovative are the scenarios. I can simulate complex scenarios. We don't have that yet. And the other is integration. What it offers helps me integrate. It helps me send information to all the organization, receive information, and make sure that I can control the response effort across multiple organizations. So, we did ask this question because this is the whole point, right? This is why this project is being funded. We want to save people's lives. So our question basically, the bottom line was, how can we develop TURNkey so that it helps you save people's lives? And it increases the accuracy and the timeliness of the response, which we know from other studies does help save people's lives. And the other thing is it facilitates a change in approach. So right now the approach is quite reactive, as in something happens and react. But this allows me to be preventative. This allows me to use the scenarios and to plan in advance in more detail with more accuracy. And that means more than reactive, I'm now being proactive. It's empowering basically to our participants. And just a few quotes just to see how people were talking about this. So, for instance, I like the first one. It will significantly reduce the time needed to coordinate. We have an immediate response ready within minutes, but then a lot of time is needed to make central decisions about priorities. So reduce that time and I will act faster. Or Reggio Calabria, seeing everything on a platform would make things easier. What you are doing is what we hope to get within a year. So, and so on. We've got loads and loads of these costs. However, it's not perfect. So I have 2 pages of single line spacing recommendations and suggestions on improvements. These are minor tweaks. The platform is very appealing. What it does is very useful. But we had lots of suggestions on things on how to improve it, to tailor it to, because people were then thinking of how can it be even more useful. There are also questions. There were a lot of questions made. This is a good sign. It means that our end users were engaged. They want to learn about the turnkey solution. So the areas that they asked about were the following. Firstly, how it works. How does it work? The reason they were asking about this was because they want to know how reliable the information they're being given is. Remember, they're making decisions that could save lives or not save lives if they make the right, if they make the wrong one. So tell us how it works. Give us the information, the detail. Where are you placing the sensors? Is all the city covered? Are there blind spots in the city that TURNkey might not be getting information from? What is the science underlying it? What we found, and we spoke to these people as well, is within these organizations you have specialists, members of staff. We spoke to a seismologist, we spoke to geologists, architects. They need the detail to be able to trust the data. What is the science underlying the data? How accurate and reliable is the information? What is the update frequency? This is important. So I know this is being updated, but at some point I need to take a decision. I can't wait for it to update. How frequently is it going to update immediately after an earthquake? What are the potential threats of integrating it into a national framework? So what we found from participants is that this would likely not be implemented on a local level, but it's probably going to need sign off from the central command. Therefore, it's likely to be considered on a national level. Are there any threats to our system of integrating it, even security threats and so on? And the criteria for OEFs and EEWs, and this is something Gemma spoke about yesterday, there are concerns. They're not barriers. There are concerns about sending early earthquake warnings out. And they need to know what the criteria are. When do we send them out? Because what if an alert is sent out to citizens especially, and the earthquake doesn't happen, that is seen as a false alarm. To citizens, that is a false alarm. And if citizens get false alarms, firstly, an alert causes anxiety, even if it happens. It causes anxiety. And it causes disruption. So one thing that municipality told us is if you send the earthquake forecasts, activity in the city will stop. Economic activity will stop. People will start stockpiling or people will start leaving the city. Too many of those disruptions are extremely detrimental to a city. So they're not saying do not send out these alerts, but they need to control when to send out these alerts. There are similar things in place. So for instance, in Patras, they have recently, after the fires that they had a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, they have alerts for wildfires now. And there have been alerts that then didn't happen. And what happened was, the first time, people, okay, read the alert, got it. The second time, it annoyed them. The third time, they were calling us to tell us, why are you sending me all these alerts? Right? So they need to be very careful. It's not about not sending them out, but they need to manage what alerts to send out and when. The other thing is the investment, of course, very important. If I do decide to adopt TURNkey within my system, what investment will it need? How much training does it require? And who do I need to train? How much time and effort to set it up, and then to keep it updated. They're aware that they need to keep the data on the assets and the areas updated. And what data do you need from me? I need to know in advance. What do you need from me to set this up? Integration. So help me integrate it with my current systems. It mustn't duplicate anything I already have. So one thing, for instance, that caused this comment was there is a facility in TURNkey that you track the actions taken, right? So you see what has been done so far in the rescue effort. The people we spoke to already have something in place for that. They can't use two systems at the same time. Again, I had one person saying I would need to have two people, one manning one of them and the other. It doesn't make any sense. So it needs to integrate. It can't make me, duplicate my efforts. And then the tailoring. This is because it got very interesting. So this is what I said about, could you add this and make this like this and so on. It's a good sign because it means they were engaged with the solution. So they have, for instance, suggested that we create other input fields that they think might be useful, other types of information, especially from the first responders. Preset messages to citizens, georeference everything. Georeferencing is so important. Anything that comes in, places on the map. Tell me where this happened. Tell me where this rescue operation happened. Make sure it shows on my overall view. Avoid busy screens. So this is the senior decision makers. Don't give me something I need to look for 5 minutes to understand what's going on. Give me something I can look at and take a decision quickly. And finally, comprehension. And this is normal. So at the last stage of a product development, you usually test things like the words that are used, right? Now, we need to bear in mind that this could be used by specialist users, by seismologists who understand, but most often it's going to be used by non-seismologists. So there were some terms that they weren't immediately understood. Something that would be interesting for my colleagues here. We have the best high and low certainty dial. The way that was interpreted intuitively was best is the most likely scenario, low is the lowest impact scenario, and high is the worst impact scenario. So we need to explain things like this, or even better, word them differently. And then things like, pie charts are not as good as bar charts. This is just a user preference, and they need to be taken into account at the final stages before rolling it out, right? So that's it. Thank you very much.